If you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma, you've probably heard that legal claims can result in big compensation. But what do these cases actually pay? Are we talking thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions? And what determines how much a case is worth? Today, I want to give you realistic numbers about mesothelioma compensation, not the extreme outliner cases you see in headlines, but the actual recovery seen in typical cases. I'm Terri Oppenheimer. I've been writing about mesothelioma and asbestos for the website mesothelioma.net for over a decade. I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, but I'm going to walk you through realistic compensation numbers based on actual case data. First, let's start with the big picture. Mesothelioma compensation can come from several different sources. You might receive money from a lawsuit settlement or verdict, from asbestos trust funds, from VA benefits if you're a veteran, from workers' compensation, and from other sources. Many mesothelioma patients receive compensation from multiple sources. For lawsuits that go to trial and result in jury verdicts, the numbers you see in headlines can be staggering. We've seen verdicts of $20 million, $40 million, even over $100 million in some cases. But the critical reality is that most mesothelioma cases settle before trial, and settlement amounts are typically much lower than jury verdicts. The average settlement for a mesothelioma case is generally in the range of $1 million to $2.4 million. That's an average, which means many cases settle for less and some settle for more. Factors that influence settlement amounts include the strength of the evidence linking your exposure to specific defendants, the number of defendants in your case, your age and life expectancy, the extent of your medical expenses, lost wages and earning capacity, the pain and suffering you've experienced, and whether you have dependents. Let's break down some realistic scenarios. For a patient with clear occupational exposure, documented work history linking them to asbestos products, multiple responsible companies still in business or with available insurance, and significant medical expenses, settlements often range from $1 million to $3 million or more. These are cases with strong evidence and multiple defendants who share liability. For a patient with a less clear-cut exposure history, fewer identifiable defendants, or defendants who have limited assets or insurance, settlements might be in the $500,000 to $1 million range. These cases have merit, but they face practical limitations on how much money is recoverable. For patients with very brief exposure, difficulty identifying responsible parties, or defendants who have already gone bankrupt without adequate trust funds, settlements may be lower, potentially between $250,000 and $500,000. Now, I want to take a little break here for a second and ask you a favor. If you're finding the information in this video helpful, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps us get seen by more people who need the information. And if you have questions you'd like answered or a topic you'd like covered in a future video, send me a note in the comments section. And make sure you watch this video until the end because I'm going to give you valuable information about accessing help and where to find resources. Now, let's talk about asbestos trust funds separately because these often provide additional compensation beyond lawsuit settlements. Dozens of asbestos companies went bankrupt after facing staggering asbestos liabilities, and many of them were required to establish trust funds to compensate victims who'd be diagnosed in the future. There are over 60 of these asbestos trust funds in existence, and they still hold billions of dollars in assets. Trust fund claims typically pay a percentage of the claim value based on the trust's payment percentage, which changes based on the trust's assets and the number of claims submitted. Some trusts currently pay 25 to 40% of claim value, while others may pay 50 to 75% or more. An individual trust fund claim may pay anywhere from $5,000 to $200,000 or more, depending on the specific trust, the strength of your exposure evidence, and the trust's payment percentage. But here's the key. You may have valid claims against multiple trust funds. If you worked in construction for 30 years and were exposed to products from 10 different bankrupt companies, you may be able to file claims with 10 different trusts. When you add up multiple trust fund claims, the total compensation from trusts can be substantial, potentially $250,000 to $1 million or more in cases with exposure to many bankrupt companies' products. If you're a veteran, VA disability compensation for mesothelioma is separate from legal claims. Veterans with mesothelioma are rated at 100% disability and can receive around $3,700 per month, which adds up to over $44,000 per year. And if you have a spouse or dependents, the monthly amount you can receive is higher. These VA benefits continue for the veteran's lifetime, and in some cases, surviving spouses can receive dependency and indemnity compensation after the veteran has passed. VA benefits, they are not reduced by legal settlements. You can receive both. In fact, for many veterans, VA benefits plus legal compensation from manufacturers or trust funds provide significant total compensation. Workers' compensation is another potential source. If you are exposed to asbestos on the job, you may be eligible for workers' compensation benefits that cover medical expenses and lost wages. Workers' comp doesn't typically provide large lump sums, but it does provide ongoing coverage of medical costs related to your illness. The important thing to understand is that workers' compensation laws, they usually prevent you from suing your employer directly for asbestos exposure. However, you can still sue the manufacturers of asbestos products your employer used or that you were exposed to on the job. This is why most mesothelioma lawsuits target product manufacturers rather than employers. Now, let's talk about what comes out of settlements before you see the money. Attorney fees for mesothelioma cases typically run 33 to 40% of the recovery on a contingency basis. So if you settle for $1.5 million and your attorney's fee is 40%, that's $600,000 that goes to the attorney, leaving you with $900,000. Case expenses also come out of the recovery. These can include costs for medical record reviews, expert witnesses, court filing fees, deposition costs, and investigational expenses. In a complex mesothelioma case, expenses may run between $50,000 and $150,000 or more. If you have Medicare or health insurance that paid medical bills related to your mesothelioma, there may be liens that need to be repaid from your settlement. These liens can be significant and must be satisfied from the settlement proceeds. So, after attorney fees, expenses, and liens, you might receive 50 to 60% of the gross settlement amount. So a $1.5 million settlement might net you $750,000 to $900,000 after all of your deductions. This is still a substantial amount of money that can help with ongoing medical expenses, lost income, providing for your family's future, and compensating you for your pain and suffering. But it's important to have realistic expectations about net proceeds versus gross settlement amounts. Timing is also important to understand. Lawsuit settlements can take 1 to 3 years or more from filing to resolution, though some cases settle faster. Trust fund claims can generally be resolved more quickly, sometimes between 6 and 12 months. And VA benefits requiring filing claims and going through the VA process, that can take several months to over a year. What determines whether your case will be on the higher or lower end of typical compensation ranges? Strong documentation of exposure, detailed work history, testimony from coworkers, Company records showing asbestos use, all of these things are critical. Cases with solid evidence, they settle for more. Multiple defendants mean more potential sources of compensation. If your exposure involved products from many components, you have many more potential defendants you can pursue. A younger age at diagnosis often results in higher compensation because your life expectancy calculations show more years lost. A 50-year-old with mesothelioma has potentially many more years of life lost than an 80-year-old, and this factors into the damages calculation. Economic damages like lost wages and future earnings capacity, those are higher for people who were still working or would have continued working for many years. A patient who was forced to retire early due to mesothelioma has quantifiable lost earnings. Your dependents also factor in. If you have a spouse and children who depend on your income, that increases the economic impact of your illness and death, and that can increase compensation. The jurisdiction where your case is filed matters too. Some states and counties have reputations for higher jury verdicts, which can influence settlement negotiations. One important thing to note: never, ever pay upfront fees to a mesothelioma attorney. Mesothelioma cases are handled on a contingency basis, and that means the attorney only gets paid if you recover compensation through their efforts. If an attorney asks for money upfront to take your mesothelioma case, that's a major red flag. So, what can a mesothelioma case pay? Realistic settlement ranges are typically $1 million to $2.4 million, with trust fund claims potentially adding hundreds of thousands of dollars more. After attorney fees, expenses, and liens, you might net 50 to 60% of gross settlements, and factors affecting amounts include exposure documentation, number of defendants, age, economic damages, and case jurisdiction. Every case is different, but substantial compensation is possible to help with medical costs and to provide for your family. Contact an experienced mesothelioma attorney to get a sense of the value of your specific case. You can visit mesothelioma.net for information about legal options, or call our helpful patient advocates at 1-800-692-8608, or use the live chat feature on our website. As for me, remember to post your questions below, and I'll see you next time.